Flooding on the Alouette River in Maple Ridge, past, present, and future. Are they inevitable, or can we plan to prevent them? On December 1, 2021, I was in Maple Ridge, BC, on the edge of the South Alouette River, a popular picnic site and children's play area. Since November, this park had looked like a lake, the result of atmospheric rivers. An atmospheric river is the amount of water contained in a river falling as rain. In Maple Ridge, they fell into a river that was already running high, and a reservoir behind Alouette Dam that was filling up quickly. Water overflowed the banks of the Alouette River. Water from rain, runoff from the local hillside, and bulging tributaries like Millionaire Creek on Fern Crescent en route to Golden Ears Provincial Park. So this is Millionaire Creek, a tributary of the Alouette River. It's along Fern Crescent. It's normal now. The water level is normal. But in November last year, this creek was just engorged with water. It was just racing down here. This is where Arms counts chum and coho salmon every year. And probably any eggs would have been washed out here. But because the water was just racing through here at the time. Jeff Clayton, past president of the Alouette River Management Society, says more needs to be known about the volume tributaries add to water level in the Alouette River to help predict future flooding. But records he's kept show these streams can add 40 to 50 cubic meters a second to the river during heavy storms. It rained cats and dogs in November 2021. According to Environment Canada, 410 millimeters of rain fell on Ridge Meadows, Maple Ridge, and Pitt Meadows, in the wettest November on record. Water in the reservoir rose. Tributaries swelled. The community of Maple Ridge braced for the worst. Local roads, including 132nd Avenue and 224th Street, would be closed. Volunteers would fill sandbags. The Alouette River Management Society would report people, quote, finding fish, salmon, swimming on roadways, unquote. How could this happen? BC Hydro manages water levels in the Alouette Reservoir. Was the effect of rapidly rising water in the reservoir fully anticipated and planned for? How well was the city of Maple Ridge prepared for communicating flood threats and response plans to the public? Did BC Hydro manage the reservoir with enough space, freeboard, to hold the stormwater in the reservoir without spilling into the river, creating a flood? These are questions that demand answers. After all, there have been floods every 1 to 12 years on the Alouette since the dam and reservoir were created in 1926. Let's look at the history with a review of what happened in November 2021. When water began to fill Alouette Reservoir at an alarming rate in mid-November, BC Hydro alerted the city of Maple Ridge of the potential for a river flood. Here's media relations spokesperson Kyle Donaldson in an email to me February 2022 explaining that alert notice. Quote, we, BC Hydro, provide spill notifications and flood alerts to downstream stakeholders at our dams and local governments, First Nations, and other agencies. Local governments use the information provided to determine next steps. This may include informing residents or activating emergency plans. BC Hydro issued a flood alert, continues Donaldson, for Alouette River on the morning of November 15. That alert was rescinded over the noon hour on November 16. The information was communicated to stakeholders, including the city of Maple Ridge. BC Hydro issued another flood alert on November 30, and the alert was updated on December 1st. Unquote. In the week of November 30, water in the Alouette Reservoir and the river would rise higher with the arrival of the third atmospheric river. Question for BC Hydro. Why was their alert of November 15 rescinded on the next day? Was this third atmospheric river expected? In late November, Public Safety Minister Mike Farnsworth said the storm moving in could be, quote, the most intense yet, unquote. I sent a lot of questions to BC Hydro on February the 25th, waited, resent them. On March 9th, BC Hydro Media Lines finally acknowledged my emails and asked for a deadline. It passed without a reply. BC Hydro says next steps were left to the city of Maple Ridge. Did BC Hydro plan any next steps itself? What responsibilities, if any, did it have for the safety of people and property on the floodplain? I'd written to BC Hydro, quote, development continues on the Maple Ridge floodplain without general public knowledge of the flood potential. Has BC Hydro ever expressed a learned opinion about the dangers of building here, especially as climate change brings extreme weather conditions? If not, why not? This is what I discovered so far on my own. In August 2006, a few BC Hydro designated community stakeholders met to review the 1996 Alouette Memorandum of Agreement, to review how it had unfolded over the 10 years since its inception. It was the document that guides how water behind the dam is used and managed. Until this MOA was officially accepted by the BC Water Controller in April 2009. Flood control states Hydro faces a number of challenges for protecting people and property below the dam. Challenge 1 is, quote, continued urban development in and around the floodplain poses additional challenges to protect people and property. 2, limited ability to route floodwaters into the stave system. 3, limited reservoir storage. 4, in storm events, rapid increases in the level of the reservoir, limited ability to forecast and predict the likelihood, magnitude, and timing of flood events. 5, limited capabilities of the infrastructure, i.e. a water diversion tunnel at the north end of Alouette Lake, spillgate, spillweir, no control and influence over downstream tributary inflow, which may independently cause flooding. These constraints, these challenges, the review concludes, often severely limit the flexibility in time with which flood management actions can take place. All these challenges still existed in November 2021, with another likely flood on the Alouette in the future. BC Hydro had issued its first flood alert November 15, then a second flood warning on November 30. Did it anticipate the amount of inflow the third atmospheric river would add to the reservoir? Clayton is a former marine engineer and power engineer with BC Hydro. He represented this stakeholder group in the review of the water use plan in 2006. Clayton maintains that water level management in the storm season dictates the Alouette Reservoir be managed for a level of 121.6 meters or less. However, as one storm after the other hit the watershed, BC Hydro was to find this was not possible, as the reservoir inflows were exceeding their ability to draw the reservoir back down to safe designated levels of 121.6 meters. For well over a month after the river flooding event on November 15, 2021. Clayton says BC Hydro believes the spillway will never be brought up to the dam's seismic rating because the soil under the dam was never engineered to the same standard as the earthen dam. He says, it is the concrete surface spillway that must be maintained to prevent cracks, which, unaddressed, can lead to hydraulic jacking and cracking up of this concrete surface when subject to high flow volumes. If this was to take place during a required spilling event to control the reservoir level, says Clayton, BC Hydro would be faced with very hazardous situation to manage. No doubt, an evacuation order for those in the valley floor below the dam would have to be considered, unquote. Was there anything to be concerned about in November 2021? Woody debris buildup rendered the spillgate, quote, temporarily inoperable. Debris buildup was a problem in 1955 and 1980. Should BC Hydro have foreseen and prepared for the debris problem of 2021? I had a lot more questions the public needs answers to. Hopefully, Hydro will respond, perhaps to an overdue Maple Ridge Council meeting addressing dam safety, a town hall meeting, or a government probe, which the public has a right to expect. I also had a lot of questions for the city of Maple Ridge. What next steps did the city of Maple Ridge take? What about BC Hydro's next steps? I had a lot of questions. Most would remain unanswered. I'd written to the city. In 2021, Hydro's spokesperson Donaldson says there was a debris buildup at the Alouette Dam, which rendered the spillgate temporarily inoperable. Debris buildup was a problem in 1955 and 1980. Does the city think BC Hydro should have foreseen and prepared for this problem in 2021? Are the debris and road problems fixed to the city's knowledge? In light of the challenges to protecting people and property below the dam, is it wise for Maple Ridge to encourage building on the floodplain? Does BC Hydro think it has any responsibility to emphatically advise the city against further growth here? So I'm standing on Fern Crescent on the way into Golden Ears Park, and as you can see, there's development taking place across the street. There seems to be more and more of this, even though people have warned against development on the floodplain. It continues at a rapid pace. Let's return to the Maple Ridge municipal government and their role in protecting people and property on the floodplain. What next steps, I've asked, did the city take to communicate flood-related information and supports to residents and others? Were they taken soon enough? Were they adequate? If not, how do we improve the communication plan to be more effective? Too much water carries risk. It's time for people who live beneath Alouette Dam to know more about risks associated with living on a floodplain downstream from a dam. In the case of the Alouette, floods have occurred on average 1 to 12 years since the dam went up in 1926. Here's a few examples from the archives of Maple Ridge Museum. 1961, January, Ridge Maple Gazette. On Sunday, Maple Ridge Park was badly hit again. The tremendous tonnage of the water spilled over the dam and into the Alouette River, augmenting rainwater flows from the land. Civil defense crews were commenced with boats to evacuate homes, remove cattle and horses. Gordon Robson, former Maple Ridge mayor and current councillor, remembers the devastating 1955 flood on the Alouette. You, as a boy, you stood roughly where we are now, under the 232nd Bridge. What did you see at that time?
Actually, we were about 100 yards up the road, and we could see the bridge from where we were standing. I was 9 years old and standing with my father, and we were watching parts of houses come down this river. And I'll never forget, and there was a piano came floating down the river and smashed into the old bridge that was here at the time. and just broke into smithereens.
Hmm.
Where we're standing right now was under at least 5 to 10 feet of water. And the two Alouette rivers came together.
Wow. Okay. So the floods have occurred here on this river since the dam went up in 1926. On regular intervals, between 1 and 12 years, there'd be another flood, and we're still having them now. Are these things inevitable, or can we do something to prevent them?
Well, that's up to the management of the dam. Even with the most astute pre-planning, with the way climate change is now, I think there's going to be flood events regardless of how well they manage it. But right now, under their current operating agreement, they do not consider floods as a big priority for them. So when they release water, they're releasing dollars in their mind. But we know from the history of the river, from the gauge, that if it goes over the mark that we know it's safe and breaches that dam, this will be underwater again.
There's more development going on the floodplain up here. I just up the road for Crescent recently, and there's more development all the time going up there. Is it wise for that to be happening?
Absolutely not, in my opinion. I think the day's going to come when most of these houses that are being built in the floodplain are going to be underwater. We're going to get an atmospheric river come through like we did last year, and that water is no mercy. And I expect that all of Abernathy will again be underwater during my lifetime.
Okay. Gordon Robson, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
January 14, 1981, Maple Ridge News. Harvey Mesh, a riverfront property owner, had built up salmon habitat, spawning gravel, but a flood washed the spawning bed away. Homeless residents, fearful of another devastating flood, blasted Maple Ridge Council for failing to act on their behalf. The News wrote, local resident Charles Tom Charter told Council, quote, BC Hydro is responsible for the flooding. If it does rain heavily and the controls of BC Hydro are again mismanaged, much more damage is imminent, unquote. Council passed a motion instructing the mayor's office to intercede on behalf of the residents. Jeff Clayton remembers what happened. Charter, he says, his house was nearly lost in the flood of 80-81. His house was on a high river bank on a bend in the river adjacent to the wagon wheel trailer court. The river comes around this bend, directing a high-velocity current against the bank his house sat on. It acted like a hydraulic monitor and washed away his front yard and over a third of the concrete and soil foundation his house sat on. The house just downstream from Tom's and Eve's was a total loss. Tom hired a contractor after the flood abated to build a riprap training wall at the front of his property to deflect the river away from his property in future floods. He was consequently charged by the DFO, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, for the alteration of fish habitat. He hired a lawyer, and after some time the charges were dropped. Then he had to rebuild the foundation for his house. Who stepped up to help him through all this stress and financial loss? No one. Tom was to join arms as a director in 1995 to help form a flood communication warning group, which we helped administer. February 5, 2005, Albert Posh, another arms director who stepped up to one side and launched a suit against BC Hydro and the District of Maple Ridge after the Alouette Reservoir breached the Free Crest Weir adjacent to the dam on November 1995. Posh contended, quote, BC Hydro was to blame for the flooding because it hadn't managed the water level either through diverting water earlier down the South Alouette or through the pipeline to Stave Lake. The complaint against the District of Maple Ridge was it failed to warn residents properly. BC Hydro and Maple Ridge settled with Posh in 2004. just before the case went to trial in BC Supreme Court. The News reported, quote, a settlement was reached with BC Hydro, agreeing to pay $412,250 and Maple Ridge $72,750, unquote. Posh commented, quote, we're only getting 50 cents on the dollar, unquote. How to avoid flooding on the Alouette in future. Clayton is clear about the best way to avoid flooding on the Alouette. Quote, the key to flood control issue is managing the amount of water held behind the dam to ensure that excess volumes can be released before the level exceeds safety limits, unquote. Here's Clayton.
Inflows in the Alouette River above 90 cubic meters per second are classed as a river flood and will create risks and adversely affect properties adjacent to the river. The flood of 1995 was in the order of 197 cubic meters per second, gauged at the 232nd Avenue Street Bridge. We have many Alouette River floods over the years, well over 100 cubic meters per second. These high river flows have come from a combination of the dam's spillway flows, a safety flow type valve adjacent to the dam, and the downstream tributaries that may kick out 40 to 50 cubic meters per second. But there is at least a 1 in 200 year risk of inflows to the reservoir in the neighborhood of 5 to 600 cubic meters per second. If this amount was to go directly through the dam spillway into the river, lives, homes, property, and bridges would suffer greatly. There is at least a 1 in 200 year risk of reservoir inflows of 5 to 600 cubic meters per second. So it all comes down to managing this huge body of water behind the dam. How is this done? The Alouette Stave Tunnel outflow route has a maximum outflow rate of 56 cubic meters per second, and the spillway's gate valve is limited to 42.5 cubic meters per second. That's a total of 100 cubic meters per second reservoir outflows to balance off a potential of 500 cubic meters per second inflows. That's a huge potential risk to inhabitants on the Alouette River valley floor below BC Hydro's dam. The only way to prevent a catastrophic river flood is to maintain a great deal of freeboard space in the reservoir in flood-prone months of the year to absorb the massive imbalance of inflows to outflows in the reservoir and hope these predictable storms will abate. I call this the silent risk nobody wants to address.
Storms precipitated the Alouette flood of 2021, as I've said. In November 2021, extreme weather conditions resulted in more water flowing into the Alouette Reservoir than could be safely released. On December 1, water would top a safety structure on the west wing of the dam called the Free Crest Spilling Weir, adding, says Clayton, quote, approximately double the volume or more in the river, unquote. BC Hydro issued a flood alert notice for the Alouette Dam as water was to breach the Free Crest Spilling Weir level. As Donaldson had noted, quote, BC Hydro has moved from a controlled spill, which began yesterday, November 14, to an uncontrolled release this afternoon, unquote. So how did we go from controlled to uncontrolled? Was it an act of God or something else? Most dams need spillways to release excessive inflows, says Clayton. In November 2021, in the midst of the first 2 to 3 atmospheric rivers, BC Hydro would tell the city of Maple Ridge there was a problem with the spillgate at Alouette Dam. Donaldson explained, quote, on the morning of November 15, the spillway operating gate was temporarily inoperable due to large debris. We were able to clear the debris and open the gate within a few hours, says Donaldson, access to the site was challenging for our crews, as roads were washed out due to heavy rain. BC Hydro had informed the city of these problems, but few folks in Maple Ridge would learn about it. On November 15, the Crown Corporation notified Maple Ridge of a flood alert for the Alouette Dam. There would be a third atmospheric river at the end of the month. Was this one fully anticipated? Has the problem with the spill gate been corrected? The road problem fixed? Could problems like this happen again? Does staff and council of Maple Ridge fully understand that some issues could not be redressed in 2021? Is Maple Ridge adequately prepared and informed of all the risks? So many important questions. What are the risks of living below a dam? Like most people, I know little about that, but Clayton does. In 2021, I interviewed him extensively on the history of the Alouette watershed and attempts to restore salmon to the lake. That's the 100 Years' War on Alouette salmon. Here's Jeff.
The failure of the dam spillway, resulting in the inability to control dangerous buildup of water in the reservoir, could lead to a dam failure. High volume flows over the spillway may cause hydraulic pressure under it, causing cracking and jacking up of the surface of the spillway, as it did in 1955.
The Maple Ridge Museum archives have a picture of this happening on Alouette Dam spillway that year. There are also newspaper reports in the Gazette and lately in the Maple Ridge News of flooding about every 1 to 12 years since it was built, with losses to property, homes, and livestock. Why are they still happening? Does the public understand the risks and causes? Is there any way to prevent these floods, or are they inevitable? Clayton wants the public to know more.
Clearly, risks and resulting impacts from the Alouette River floods have come about by allowing BC Hydro to hold 125.51 meters above sea level. Live storage license, because that is the top of the spillway. This means there is no safety freeboard in their license. This license stands without challenge by BC Hydro's Ministry of Forest, Lands and Natural Resource Operations, the Water Rights Branch, to this day. But that needs to be reconsidered, and part of the conversation should focus on spillway safety and failure.
The causes of spillway failure are explained in Strategies for Improving the Safety of Spillway Gates, B.W. Leyland Consultants, Auckland, New Zealand, 2019. I quote, "There is a 1 in 100 chance that a single gate will fail to open when needed. Compare the failure of airplanes and nuclear power stations. Both are examples of failures that can cause major loss of life or have significant public impact," unquote. Accounts of near disasters that have resulted should also be better known. Grady Hillhouse of Practical Engineering tells the frightening story of a near disaster involving the Oroville Dam in Northern California. Quote, "In 2017, concrete slabs in the spillway failed during emergency releases from the floodgates," says Hillhouse. "It's a problem because," quote, "emergency spillings are only intended for use during an emergency event," unquote. After Oroville, Hillhouse explains an independent forensic review later would conclude that sudden high volume rush of water started a chain of events that prompted the evacuation of 200,000 people downstream. The dam did not fail, but it, quote, "came too close for comfort," unquote. The Maple Ridge Museum has photos of the Alouette Dam spillway cracking and jacking in 1955, which are similar to what happened at Oroville. Here's Clayton again.
Earth-filled dams like the Alouette can fail because of the failure of the spill gate. Spill gates are the safety valve to release water before it goes over the top of the dam, just like a pressure cooker valve lets the steam out before it blows up. In 1955, another storm event would have brought the reservoir dangerously high. In an earthen dam, water is not meant to approach or cap the top because it would slice right down through the top of the dam and cut down into it. The dam, consequently, would fail. We were on a whisper away from that in 1955. Fortunately, the rain stopped. Photos of the 1955 breakup of the spillway are a matter of record in the museum.
So right now, BC Hydro's license is expired. So they have no license on this river. That is going through a so-called public process and consultation with Katzie First Nation about reissuing the license. And they're talking about in perpetuity. So now is the time for that discussion to take place. We're hoping, with Katzie's involvement, that there will be a priority put into the river language and the language of the contract that fish are a priority. We think if we can get that done, then we can talk about restoration of the river, we can talk about a fish ladder, and try to bring the river back to some kind of glory that it used to have. BC Hydro has pictures during the first 4 years after the dam was built of fish against that dam, rubbing their noses on it, trying to get up it, that were, the guys sitting in front of it were waist deep in salmon.
I guess also there has to be language about flood control.
That would be, you would think that flood control would also be a big part of whatever license they're going to issue. The water controller of British Columbia is the one who issues that license. We do not know of what the criteria is. We do not know how that decision is going to be made. That's one of the things that ARMS is carefully monitoring and making submissions on. So I'm hoping it will not slide by unnoticed.
Water use plans with representation from community stakeholders and BC Hydro define how water control facilities, dams, will be managed. One of their objectives is to, quote, minimize flood damage to people and property, unquote. That, as I've said, is Section 511 of the 2006 Water Use Plan Review, Flood Control. It supports Robson's contention that future flooding will occur with this warning. Nevertheless, a lot of people have moved onto the floodplain in recent years, and development continues at a rapid pace. A roundabout on 232nd Street initially peels off onto Fern Crescent, the only road into Golden Ears Provincial Park, one of the busiest in BC. In the summer, traffic into this area, campers, hikers, picnickers, horse trailers, can be backed up for a mile. In November 2021, water was rising quickly in the reservoir behind the dam, the result of combined heavy rain, snow, runoff around Mike Lake, a popular recreation destination, paved residential development. All of this is a concern for many folks. Why isn't there a neon sign downstream warning of spilling at the dam? Those concerned include Robson. Quote, "If we have a disaster up there," said Robson, "we're in big trouble because there's only one way in and out. We need that 240th bridge in and out of Abernathy Road on the river's south side. I will not vote on principle for any development application in Silver Valley until there's a plan to build a bridge that doesn't negatively impact fish and habitat," unquote. This was something we need to talk about as a community. I was curious to know who at Maple Ridge City Hall had been informed about problems with the dam spillgate. Were you aware the spillgate was temporarily inoperable on November 14th? I asked Robson. "No, I was not," he said. "Should you have been as a counselor?" "Yes, I should have," he said. "Do you think the public should have this kind of information as well?" "Yes," said Robson. "The public should know as much as possible." I messaged Councillor Ahmed Youssef. Did he know about problems with the spillgate and debris. No, sir, I did not, he answered. Do you think you should have been informed? Yosef replied, yes, I do. When I'm able, I will raise this as unacceptable for our community to not know what's happening with a vital infrastructure component. The Pitt Meadows Council should know too, because they're also affected, unquote. Good idea. That should open a lot more questions in council, some about the city's communication with residents, and even with Maple Ridge Council itself. Who at City Hall actually got BC Hydro's alerts? Who within council subsequently learned about them? Have problems with the Alouette Dam spillgate and debris buildup in 2021 been resolved? Was communication with residents complete, timely, effective in 2021? If not, what is the city's plan for improving communications? These were questions I was directed to submit to Dave Pollock, a member of the Maple Ridge Emergency Operations Committee in Maple Ridge. Quote, the city shared Environmental Canada notices to the city's social media channel on November 14, Mr. Pollock replied in an email. Quote, in addition to the city's website, residents can sign up for alerts via email or text using the Notify Me system. This didn't answer my questions. I resubmitted them. Will residents and park users be warned soon enough before the next flood happens? How will they and anyone else in the area at the time be supported if roads are closed, if evacuations are necessary? Was there enough timely and effective communication in 2021? How long after BC Hydro alerted Maple Ridge of flood potential did the city relay information to residents and park users? On March 9, Mr. Pollock replied to these and other questions I'd submitted one last time. Quote, as you are aware, dams in BC are regulated under the Water Sustainability Act. As your questions pertain largely to dam safety, please consider reaching out to BC Hydro or the Ministry of Forest, Lands, Natural Resources, Operations, and Rural Development. And he gives me their email address. Over the last month or so, continues Mr. Pollock, I have provided responses to questions directed at various staff relating to the Alouette River and the heavy rains in November and December of last year, and pointed you to a range of information resources online and through BC Hydro. Therefore, I will not be responding further on the 26 questions you outlined below, unquote. I still wasn't getting the answers I wanted. Individuals I talked to since November hadn't gotten answers either. On December 1, a parent at Cross Cabins Park along Fern Creston told me her child attended school on 232nd Street. Would the road be closed and her child stranded? She said when she called Maple Ridge City Hall to find out, the receptionist wanted to know who to direct her call to. What department? She didn't know. She said, well, whoever is in charge of flooding information. That didn't help. Eventually, the receptionist, quote, told me to check the city's website, unquote. That advice also turned out to be frustrating. City waited too long to release information, former Maple Ridge Mayor Nicole Reed told me. That signals to me a lack of communication, she said. It bothered me that citizens were asking questions with other residents. Should I go to work? Would people around 132nd Street, Silver Valley, Rock Creek, Rock Ridge be cut off by water covering the road at the roundabout? There was a lot of confusion. Does the city have a communication plan that includes whether we need to shelter down for several days? We also need to know what exactly happened in the last flood and how much notification we will get next time. The city says, continues Reed, it posted on social media. Was that effective? Yes, the city posted on Facebook, says Reed, but not everybody is on Facebook. People need another way to be notified of everything they need to consider. Does the city have a communication plan that includes information about whether we need to shelter down for several days? We need to know what exactly happened and how much notification we will get next time. Should the public get answers to all these questions, I asked? More communication is always better, says Reed. We need a town hall meeting so people can get answers from the city and BC Hydro. BC Hydro needs to do a lot more than just notify the city. I don't think it's accountable enough to residents. At the end of the day, we love living here, but we're not getting the answers we need, unquote.
So I'm talking to Catherine Wagner, a well-known local writer and mentor of writers in Maple Ridge. Kathy, you live very close to here. The water was coming into the river at a rapid rate, the water rising, the river was rising. You knew about it. You were wondering if there was any problem for where you were. And then you got a letter from the city on November 29th.
What happened was we do live outside of the flood zone. And we did look into that before we purchased the property. But on November 29th, and we had the atmospheric river situation for well over a week. I happened to be on Facebook at about 6 o'clock at night, which I'm not normally on there in the evening. And I saw a post from the city that said that there was the potential for flooding and that 232nd could be cut off and people in Silver Valley needed to prepare for 3 days being unable to leave the neighborhood. And I'm like, what? And so then I thought, well, we're not Silver Valley. We're one street over. We're on the south side of the river. What does it mean for me? Near as I could tell, they were talking about it going up to the Petro-Can. I'm not sure. And that's the corner of the only way in and out of our community. So I couldn't find any more information. I couldn't call the city because it was after hours. It told everybody to prepare for floods. I'm like, oh, do I have everything I need? Am I, you're kind of half going, I'm not prepared for 3 days or more. And then I was thinking, if I'm just seeing this, then who isn't seeing it that's up in Silver Valley? And so I went on the Silver Valley neighborhood page and I made a post. Actually shared the city's post and asked the question if anybody knew whether my area in the Davison Pool subdivision would be cut off. And nobody seemed to know. And somebody eventually pointed me to a map that UBC had done quite a few years ago that was on their site. And I tried looking at it and I couldn't figure out whether we'd be cut off. It turns out we probably wouldn't have been. But I had no idea, and I can't imagine how people who were in Silver Valley reacted. And then they said that they were going door to door, but apparently they only went door to door to properties that were right on the river. And that they had a letter, and the letter was actually delivered to us, but not until the following day. And it was dated the 29th, but it didn't show up on our doorstep until the 30th.
This was a time of a little bit of anxiety, and you had lots of questions. You had lots of questions that weren't being answered, but you went to the website. Did that help?
No. No. And the thing is, I'm signed up for just about every alert there is. You know, the road. I find the city's alerts really useful, and about road closures and various things. Nothing came through that way. Now, apparently they said they had an alert system, and somehow I ended up on it within a couple of days. I got an alert from an alert system for the river, but I'd never seen anything from that before, and I actually had no idea about the dam and the possibilities of, the dam breaching, and I learned a fair bit about hydro and the river, but yeah, so.
So going forward, the important thing is going forward. Communication was less than complete at this time. But what do you have any ideas, have any thoughts about how the city could improve its communication with residents and people in the area going forward?
Yeah, maybe. I understand that part of the problem is Hydro sending information to the city, but it's not like you couldn't see this one coming a bit of a ways off. It was the third wave, I think, of the atmospheric river.
That's right.
And, if you'd been filming down here then, like, the river was high. I've never seen it like that, and we've been here 12 years.
Yeah.
So, even just remind you that this is a possibility, maybe some ongoing education for people that live in this area. Maple Ridge turns over, especially with the housing market these days. How many new residents have no idea? People should do their due diligence, but that's not an excuse not to inform people.
Yeah. Okay.
All
right.
Some type of FAQ on their website too about how to get more information would be helpful.
Catherine Wagner, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's no surprise, says Barry Lister, a floodplain resident and member of the Alouette Valley Association. On November 15, he tried to get on-the-ground help from the city.
Barry, what is the Alouette Valley Association? Roughly how many members do you have, and what's your purpose?
Well, we have about 20 active members, and then the whole Alouette Valley we consider as part of our membership. So we're trying to preserve this beautiful place that we live. We live on the North Alouette River. We moved here for the river and the wildlife and the rural lifestyle. And that's pretty much what we're trying to do in the Alouette Valley. We're just trying to preserve this very beautiful place from, development, from increased traffic, from loss of wildlife, and just preserve our quality of life.
So we're at the north end of 224th Street. You were here when the flood was at its worst. What were you doing? What was the problem?
Well, I was here because what happened was the river had breached, and at this stage now, the river is breaching in many different places and creating really some uncertainty on where the water is going to go. So what happened was, I live on 132nd Avenue, and the road, water was on the road. So water was also on the road here, and if you notice in front of the Humble Roots, there's a bit of a depression. So that would have been, I think, about almost 2 feet of water, right? And when the river floods, we are supposed to get the roads closed and police or traffic marshals in place to prevent people from driving on these roads. And there's a few reasons for that. The standing water on the road, when cars drive over it, it creates a wake. So if there's water in our yard, that wake actually creates more of a destructive force to our houses. It'll start to come up and it might eventually creep in our house. So we can't have cars on the road. It's also these depressions in a small car, the car is going to wash out, right? So now it's going to be damaged cars. There could be kids in there, it could get filled with water. Bottom line, if we had to get out of here, and there's all this traffic on the road, it also creates a bit of a challenge. The other reason too is there's also some individuals in large trucks that think it's quite enjoyable to come down here during a flood and drive their big trucks really fast through the water, which even just makes things worse. So I was down here stopping traffic from moving forward, and my wife and another neighbor were up on 132nd and 224th, also stopping traffic. Essentially, there was a big depression here full of water. Across the bridge, you couldn't drive across because of the water. There's water west on 132nd now. Essentially, we were surrounded by water. But the roads are still open to the general public. And I feel bad for the individuals that didn't have a clue that was going on. So what I was doing out here was basically telling people that you can't come through any further for many reasons, and you had to detour around Abernathy.
You had let the city know about this and hoped that they were down here at the time, but they didn't show up for a while.
No, they didn't show up for a while, and this has been a common thread. Our Alouette Valley Association has been in discussions with them on things that we can do to help, in situations like this. And one of them is we need the roads closed, and we need it to be managed by, as I say, either the police or a traffic management company. And again, it doesn't. And we called and emailed and tried to find somebody. When eventually they finally sent somebody, the individuals did not have a clue what to do, and people talked their way around it. So it helped a minor bit, but again, this is well known that this needs to be closed down during the flood. So some of these things we had a meeting with the city about a month ago, and just to discuss again the ongoing situation with the flooding of the river. So there were things like that were discussed years and years ago and brought up in the Golder Report and other reports, things like log jams on the river. There's been a log jam down on city property behind the Equestrian Center since 2020. The main tree is still there. I remind them a lot. It just does not, nothing gets done. There's been development up on the in Silver Valley. They put a large pipe into the river just upstream, which drains the urban developments, which has increased water flow into the river. There's some of the development now has been allowed to fill on the floodplain. There was a study done with guidelines on fill, which we believe are not being followed. Again, there's just all these small, the ditches need to be cleaned. Like if you look at these ditches, how can anything drain from the valley, even in a big rain? So we have some concerns that we are wanting to work with the city on, because they're beyond our control as a neighborhood association to get these done.
Communication has been a big problem. How do you feel about the way the city has communicated with you and responded to your concerns overall?
You know, I think, you know, there are some individuals that have been good with communication and have, you know, heard our concerns, but, you know, our last meeting was with some new individuals who don't know the history of this river, and, you know, they haven't been down here during the flood, and you probably well know, Jack, like, until you come down here and see what it's done, you don't really get a good understanding on what's going on down here. So I would like to see the city be a little more proactive, because it's not just for us living down here, for city parks, there's infrastructure. There's supposed to be a new park at the end of 224th. There's residents up in Silver Valley that use this as a, you know, a throughway, and if the bridges were to go out, there's no exit, you know, from the valley. So I think it's in everyone's best interest to work together to try to alleviate the flooding.
So you have had a response from the city about all of the various concerns that you outlined and specified in your letter to them. And after you read it, you concluded, quote, "We find their responses lacking substance, timelines, and accountability." Did you want to just expand on that a little bit and what you would like instead of that kind of response?
I mean, there were some things when we had our discussions with them that could be done immediately. Like, for example, like, although this doesn't really prevent the flooding, but our traffic management plan, if they could produce a traffic management plan that's in place, you know, with a direct contact that anytime there's a flood, this is done and this is how it's done. So little things like that, like the log jam should have been removed 2 years ago. So there were some small steps that could be done now, but instead we get this back and we're again sitting and waiting. I believe they're waiting on another study. I believe there's been enough studies done with enough information provided that we can actually now move forward with getting things done. And again, we can't directly control the environment and global warming and these atmospheric rivers, as they call them, you know, but we can start right now by, you know, alleviating the flooding on the river, which we believe can be done, and then you know, we can all move forward from there.
So far, letters back and forth have not been very successful in actually getting actions, specific actions. Do we need a follow-up with the city, with Hydro, a town hall meeting where all of the concerns can be brought out and actual mitigations nailed down and timeline?
Absolutely, absolutely. And now our next steps are, there's our core group of the AVA Alouette Valley Association that's been to the meetings and been very active with all of this. But everybody in this neighborhood is now very concerned about the situation. So our next step now is we're going to have a town hall meeting where we invite everyone from the Alouette Valley to come and attend. We'll put an invitation out to the city so they can come down and you know, hopefully they'll send somebody to you know, hear the city, hear our concerns, and then again come up with a plan that, you know, that has a timeline with some of the things that we already know, and we can move forward and alleviate this problem, because I do believe that we can alleviate this problem. We all moved down here, like the majority of the people down here, because it's an extremely beautiful area and we're surrounded by wilderness, and we knew, the majority of us especially, we knew that the river flooded, that the river would breach. All of our houses are built on high crawl spaces to protect our homes and properties from the houses. And this has been the way it's been for, 100 years, right? So when we get when people say to us, well, you should expect this because you moved down to a floodplain. We expected water in our yard to come and water to go. Now the water's coming and it's not going anywhere. So things have changed since, the majority of us have moved here. And so, yes, we knew about the flooding issues, but what we're experiencing now is not what we bought into. So, that's exactly why we want to start moving forward and alleviating this problem so we can share this beautiful area with the rest of the community.
Good summation, Brian.
So, what was the city's communication plan before BC Hydro issued flood alerts and notices of problems with an inoperable spill gate? I asked Robson, should the city initiate a public awareness campaign that includes easy access to real-time updates about water levels, a one-stop source of information? Robson, we don't have a system for communicating with residents. We have a full-time emergency measures coordinator. She's working on a communication plan. We haven't had an update in some time, unquote. Is there an updated version of the plan the public could learn about? What are the details? Questions like these should be answered by the city, the body responsible for the next steps after BC Hydro notifies Maple Ridge of flood potential. But even in March, I hadn't received any answers from city staff. About that time, though, I'd been offered a new source of information by the executive assistant of the city's chief administrative officer, who emailed, a quote, I know David Pollock has responded to your email, but if you should provide me with a phone number, I can have Mayor Morden reach out to you, unquote. Shortly afterwards, I got a call from Mr. Morden, who asked I forward him my questions. Warning me some might be beyond his technical knowledge, I suggested he answer the ones he could and pass the others to appropriate staff. Several days later, Mayor Morden emailed again. The questions you have submitted are beyond my current scope of knowledge, hence why I depend upon support from those with expertise, which is where your question should be posed, on an each to their own domain basis, which I sense that you already are well versed. Our staff will respond as able to what is in their domain and direct you to other sources you may wish to check in with to fill in the blanks, which I can see are predominantly for BC Hydro response. Best regards, Mike. When no answers came back from staff, I decided to limit the questions to 5 pertaining directly to the mayor with an explanation. BC Hydro says it informed the city on November 15 the spill gate was temporarily inoperable because of build-up debris and couldn't be fixed manually because the road to it was muddy. Here are my questions to the mayor. 1. Did you personally, as mayor, see this message from BC Hydro on November 15? And if not on that day, when? 2. Was the BC Hydro spillway gate and debris problem shared with council? 3. Do you, as mayor, know whether the problems with the spillgate and debris issues has been resolved by BC Hydro? 4. Do you, as mayor, have any concerns for the safety of the dam today? And 5. Can we still meet in person? To date, I have had no reply from the mayor. I had a lot of questions for BC Hydro, but as of March 18, 2022, 2 days after the deadline they asked for, I hadn't received a response, and still haven't to this day. And then there's Maple Ridge City Hall. It still hasn't replied to my questions, but I'd like to know who at City Hall received Hydro's alerts, and who, if anyone on council, was made aware of them. Question 2. Why wasn't the warning about a temporarily inoperable spill gate, debris, road access problem passed on to the public? Not just residents, but to anyone going into Golden Ears Park. That's unacceptable, in my opinion. An open, transparent conversation needs to take place to address all concerns about the Alouette's potential for flooding and what has to be done. That's City and BC Hydro. They have to be at such a meeting to answer all questions once and for all. Jeff Clayton's summary of the risk involved in living below a dam, like the Alouette Dam in Maple Ridge, could help direct such a local meeting to proactive local action. Here's Jeff Clayton.
Most dams, including the Alouette Dam, store a large amount of water, which pose a risk to anyone on the floodplain in the event of a dam failure. The failure or partial failure of the dam's spillway to contain a buildup of water in the reservoir could lead to a dam failure. High flows over the spillway could cause hydraulic pressure under the dam spillway, and that could lead to a hydraulic jacking and cracking up of the surface of the spillway, as it did in 1955. 3. The risk of total dam failure seems less of a risk than driving to work. Most people see it as a remote possibility. 4. Generally, we take comfort when BC Hydro says its about 80 dams will gradually be upgraded to withstand a 1 in 10,000 year seismic event, shockwaves. But BC Hydro falls silent on the risk for those living on or near property below the dam and the cities of Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows, perhaps not understanding it, deferring the issue to BC Hydro. 5. It's time to educate everyone on the underlying causes of reservoir-related flood on the Alouette River. To discuss that, I call the risk nobody wants to address. Firstly, there is a 1 in 200 year risk of inflows to the Alouette Reservoir possibly reaching 500 to 600 cubic meters per second. 7. If this amount of water passed through the dam spillway to the river, lives, homes, property, bridges, livestock, pets would be imperiled. 8. Flooding occurs when water volumes in the Alouette River is measured above 90 cubic meters per second at the 232 Street Gauging Station, Water Survey Canada. That's happened many times already. In 1995, Water Survey Canada recorded 197 cubic meters per second. Extensive damage occurred. 10. The challenge then and now is to release water from the Alouette Reservoir through existing outlets from the dam and the water diversion tunnel, but the spillway is limited to 42.5 cubic meters per second and the tunnel to 56 cubic meters per second for a total of 100 cubic meters per second. 11. Therefore, the only way to prevent a catastrophic river flood is to maintain a great deal of safety room, freeboard, in the reservoir to absorb the inflows expected in winter storms, aggravated possibly by climate change. 12. Currently, BC Hydro's water storage license behind the dam gives the company the right to hold a reservoir level at 125.5 meters, right at the crest of the spillway. 13. I have argued that the 125.51 meters, being the top of the free crest weir, this elevation needs to be avoided because this is the level in which water will start spilling directly into the river. 14. I have challenged this personally before the BC Water Rights Controller accepting the Alouette 2009 Water Use Plan on behalf of ARMS. However, BC Hydro's water storage license stands without challenge by the provincial government or municipalities to this day. 15. Managing the reservoir freeboard for safety to the public and property, in the flood months especially, should not be left solely to BC Hydro, but demands oversight by the BC Government, Ministry of Forest, Lands and Natural Resource Operations, the Water Rights Branch. 16. To conclude, A very real risk will continue to people on the Alouette Valley floor unless BC Hydro changes their water management in the Alouette Reservoir. B. BC Hydro engineers assume the Alouette Dam could settle about 1 meter in a strong earthquake. This would shear or collapse the low-level outlet pipe on the dam, the river's water supply, and likely disable the spill gate and the breakup of the spillway, making it unmanageable to pass water from the reservoir into the river.
I was told early on in the 1960s, when I became an employee of BC Hydro, that the dam was not there for flood control or fishery interests. I felt that was an extreme interpretation, but in noting the water licenses held by BC Hydro, it was true. There was nothing in there for those concerns. Flooding we experienced in the Alouette River in 2021 is not unique. It's brought about because the reservoir behind the dam has a limited capacity to hold these storms that come across from the Pacific. Some of the snow melt off the mountains, suddenly flash down in there. The only way this water can be held behind the dam is there has to be a sufficient hole in the reservoir to start with. It's called freeboard. And that hole is brought about by the fact that we can divert water from the Alouette into the Stave. But there's an unlimited amount that we can divert. And that is the issue that we tried to address in 1996, and that is how much space, what was the level of the reservoir that would contain these storms, and when should the diversion valve or control for the tunnel be opened to see that there was a full flow going out of the Alouette over towards the Stave to maintain that hole. After modeling it with computers, we found that at 122.6 meters in elevation above sea level, if the tunnel flows were open fully, that we could change the flood return period in the river dramatically. We could change it by a 1 in 12 year average return period to a 1 in 35 or 36 years. And that's considerable. That was a 300% change. But back in 1996, we didn't, at least at the local level, know about climatic warming and the changes that were going to come. So consequently, what we did then is out of date now. And it's been out of date for a considerable number of years. And ARMS and others have asked for this to be looked at. And there was a commitment that it would be looked at by the Water Rights Branch in 2014, 2017 it was moved to, then 2019, then 2021. And here we are now in 2022 and it still hasn't been done. This is a critical issue that the province, BC Hydro, has to come together and say, get on with it. Get this done. Get this study carried out. We've just had a flood in 2021 coming down the Alouette River. You know, that's a wake-up call. We've got issues. Next year could be worse. And there is still no commitment to sit down in a room, get the engineers together, get the modeling done, and look at this outdated report and find how we're going to control this reservoir above the dam. This is not there just for hydroelectric energy. This is there and was agreed to in 1996 as a flood control device as well. And right now, we're not using it in the way we could. We're not getting ahead of the curve. These storms are coming in. Their radar has seen them coming across the Pacific. We have the benefit of the latest technology, and we're not using it. And consequently, if I could leave one message in this video that's been done, and that is, get on with the job. We all know what has to be done. Do it.
For some unknown reason, when floods occur in this area along the Alouette River, residents and people using the park are surprised. They're surprised by the degree of the flooding. They're surprised by the difficulty in getting answers that they need answers for right away. Communication seems to be in need of an upgrade. They need a plan for this. There has to be a way to let everybody know as quickly as possible what the situation is, what the dangers are, how to prepare for it, how the city is going to respond, their next steps, BC Hydro's next steps. All of that information needs to come out. I think the only way to get that out is through a venue like a town hall meeting. And a town hall meeting would do it. There should also be a fair amount of discussion of this topic in Maple Ridge Council. More has to be known. A lot more can be done, apparently, to protect people from floods. But it's going to take a concerted effort by the major bodies responsible for that, and that's Maple Ridge, Pitt Meadows Councils, and BC Hydro. I'm Jack Emberly.